welcome to Games as Lit 101. There's a problem regarding video games that we've really only come to consider in the last 10 years or so, and unfortunately most people don't quite seem to realize that it's an issue at all. This is the problem of preservation. Due to the importance of art to its culture, not to mention its importance to those who wish to study that culture in the future, we've always placed a high priority on the preservation of great works of art. To lose a work of art is to lose a piece of the time and culture in which it was made, and there are few things quite that tragic. This is why we so value the classic works of every given medium. Video games, despite their relatively short life thus far, have already had a lot of works fall into obscurity. A lot of games that were available only on arcade machines, or even beloved PC classics that just don't work on modern computers, have been lost to time. And as a result, there are a lot of people who really care about this medium and who attempt to study it, but still haven't been able to play a lot of the classic works. Now you may think it's not that important, but art is and always has been an important part of culture and history. It's a cultural force for change, and a window into the beliefs and issues of a society. The historical significance of art to understanding a past culture is not to be underestimated. This is why we work so hard to preserve it. It's why documents like the Declaration of Independence and paintings like the Mona Lisa have such insane storage methods to make sure they're not harmed by vandalism or even just the passing of time. It's why we still print books like the Odyssey, still listen to Mozart's music, still perform Shakespeare's plays, and still distribute films like Casablanca. Aside from that, art continues to grow and expand, largely because of the study of existing art. Few master artists in any craft have ever attained their skills without studying at least some of the classic works of their medium. But obviously, the classic works of their medium must still exist in order to be studied. So, long story short for all of this, there are a variety of reasons why it's important to preserve art for future generations. Now, of course, video games have only recently been looked at in a light that would justify such preservation, so it's understandable that no one was freaking out about preserving Tetris back in the days of the NES. But as time has passed, and technology has advanced and video games have become more culturally relevant, this has become something of an issue. Now, preserving an art form's history and development is something that has to be done on purpose and with effort. Perhaps the most tragic artistic losses of the last century or so were in the realm of film, and they were all just due to negligence. With little mind to the concept of film as a valuable and relevant art form, production companies would simply store film reels in mass storage, or even just destroy them to make room for more stuff once their initial theater runs were complete. Due to the chemical makeup of film at the time, fires were fairly common, and multiple storage sheds went up in flame. The most famous was the MGM fire in 1967, which destroyed all of the original negatives of MGM's films made before 1935, literally hundreds of movies. And a fire at Fox Pictures in 1937 destroyed most of their silent films made before 1933. It's estimated that more films from the silent era have been lost than not. And that's just tragic. Now obviously, especially in the digital age, video games don't face the same kinds of problems, but they do face problems nonetheless. Physical copies of games can become scarce, and for that matter, they can become very hard to play when the system they were made for is a few generations old and very hard to find. Even digital games and computer games can become unplayable as operating systems and computers move forward technologically. Heck, a lot of retail outlets even have a pretty horrible habit of outright destroying perfectly good games when they're considered unsellable for one reason or another. Already, the only legal way to play some games, like Terranigma on the Super Nintendo, or that old Dune game that completely revolutionized the real-time strategy genre and is now largely forgotten, is to actually own an original cartridge for the game as well as the old system the game was originally made for, which is already easier said than done and will not get any easier with time. Even digital games are going to become unplayable over time as new consoles and new operating systems are released, thus making the game's code obsolete. Now, one could argue that the games that we lose in this process are simply the ones that weren't significant enough to keep around, but you might want to remember that people like Shakespeare and Van Gogh weren't actually appreciated for years after their own deaths, and now those people are just absolute required reading, if you will, for their respective mediums. I think it's safe to say that we can't really predict exactly what's going to be considered a masterpiece in the future. To make things worse, we're moving more and more toward online elements as vital components of our games, and stuff like that simply can't last forever. We've already seen games completely lose online functionality, or even entire game consoles, once server maintenance is no longer a viable financial option for their creators, resulting in the loss of an integral part of the experience, or even the entire ability to play the game. So obviously, steps must be taken to preserve our medium's history. The best way we figured out how to do this so far is through ports and re-releases of older games onto newer systems. So things like Nintendo's Virtual Console, ports from last generation games onto new generation systems, and projects like Good Old Games and the Internet Archive are major steps in the right direction. But stuff like that only really happens to games that get a lot of love, or more often, a lot of profit. It's hardly a comprehensive effort to maintain a cohesive archive of interactive works. Thankfully, video games have a huge and healthy modding community that can help digitally store and maintain these games. Or at least they could, if they were allowed. It's no secret that copyright law is in need of some serious revision and adjustment in the digital age, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation recently tried to amend it with a proposition that would allow third parties to maintain and archive old and abandoned games after their distribution and server support were no longer being maintained by their creators. No decision has been reached as of the making of this video, but immediately organizations like the Entertainment Software Association and even the Motion Picture Association of America, for some reason, wrote in opposition to the proposed changes. Their reasoning? That kind of maintenance on old games requires hacking and modding, which are related to piracy. Thus, this amendment would encourage piracy. Ultimately, it's a tenuous objection at the very best, but unfortunately it's the kind of thing that's been happening for a long time now. The games that the EFF hopes to maintain with this amendment are no longer being manufactured, sold, or even just maintained by their creators, meaning that there is absolutely no financial gain to be had from holding on so tightly to overzealous copyright policies. And yet, they continue attempting to protect what is not actually being threatened in the first place. Ultimately, we're going to need to do some work to preserve and archive the history of this medium, and if we don't figure out how sometime soon, we're going to lose even more of our early work. Hopefully, sometime in the near future, we can have some sort of breakthrough that will allow and even encourage the preservation of interactive art, because I don't want to look back on this 50 years from now and wish that we had more of our history to study and appreciate. In any case, I hope you viewers are valuing the classics and taking some time to at least check out some of the important and formative works of our medium's history. So go ahead and talk about this issue in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you really like what we're doing here and want to see the show grow and improve, please also consider checking out the Patreon link in the description. Next week, we're doing some more literary analysis, and we're going to be talking about Halo, the influential and beloved science fiction shooter that may not get quite enough credit for its storytelling. So until then, class dismissed.